Today we're going to be looking here at chapter 15. It is a chapter that focuses on religion, and so some interesting thoughts again here in this chapter. And this first slide shows us the things that are going to be covered in the chapter. So Emil Durkheim is mentioned here in his analysis of religion. We're going to look at some of the world religions. We have some different viewpoints here presented in the system of beliefs that people value very highly, and how they're in some cases similar, and in others there are differences. We're going to look at the three big theories of sociology and what it would have to say about religion, and a discussion there about the components of religion and the symbols that go along with the beliefs, and the sacred versus the profane, and things of that nature. Some of the religious organization, and then a couple case studies there about religion in India, and then ending up with social policy and religion. And then there's a good little article there about the religion in the schools and some issues to consider. So here on our next slide, here's the questions we want to think about in the chapter. What social purposes does religion serve? And so there's some that are intended and obvious, and then there's others that are not intended and less obvious that happen, and positive things, and maybe some dysfunctions or negative things to consider as well. All right, how does religion play a part in either bringing society together or tearing it apart? So that's our second question here. What happens when religion and politics mix? And so usually those are two things that people generally don't like to talk about, it seems, because they don't want to say something that really offends others. And so, when you're thinking about the things in the chapter, don't practice this third one here. It's good to think about things and question and discuss them with others, but in a non-threatening and non-argumentative manner. I think that turns a lot of people off with politics and religion, that sometimes people get very heated, and we can do that, have these discussions without doing that. All right, then another big question there is, does religion belong in the public schools? Near the end of the chapter, there's a good article in the book that talks about that quite a bit. All right, so we mentioned Durkheim. Here we are on this next slide and his approach to religion. And so, what do we mean by religion? But a unified system of beliefs and practices that are related to the sacred things. So not everyday, ordinary, worldly things, but things that seem to be very important and sometimes transcend our physical existence into time and space, and to other things where traditionally God is where He is located there. So that's just some of the ideas that go along with that definition of religion, and I'm sure we could add some more in there as well. All right, but there is a difference there between the sacred, which is impacting or talking about religion, and so there, the weeping wall, I think, is what we see in our picture there in Jerusalem. So that's a good example. If you attended services here recently, communion is another good example of an action there that represents a belief about a religious founder and the sacrifice that he made. And let's see, profane really has nothing to do with religion, so it would be everything that doesn't involve religion. So those are our two big categories that we need to differentiate between. All right, now our book mentions here on the next slide about 89% of the world's population adheres to some sort of religion. And to me, that actually seems a little low to some of the books that I have seen. They would maybe argue just a little bit higher in the low 90s, but anyway, we're pretty close. So that's a really interesting comment could be made there, is that almost 9 out of 10 people believe in religion. So there's some ideas here in our textbook that we're going to look at today that says that those who are religious are just they're not thinking clearly. So if going along with that statement, that means 9 out of 10 people just don't think clearly. So that's a lot of people to write off because of you don't agree or don't see their ideas as being legitimate. All right, but anyway, within those who do believe in religion, Christianity is the largest. So some of the numbers that I've seen is a little over 2 billion followers in a world with 7 billion people. Islam is number 2, and they're approaching that 2 billion, so my numbers may be off a little, but that's the last data that I had seen. Judaism is actually, our book claims there, has both Christianity and Islam as factors in it, but their numbers, vastly turned down. So really, 15 to 20 million is the number of adherents for Judaism, and maybe some commonality there with Christianity and the fact that their religious book is the first 5 books of the Old Testament that is also in the Christian Bible. All right, Hinduism is another religion here that's mentioned on our slide, and the numbers here for Hinduism and Buddhism go down, but they're certainly much greater than there for Judaism, and these are typically referred to as Far Eastern religions. And so with Buddhism, we do see a specific founder, like in Jesus with Christianity, and with Muhammad, who's a central figure for Islam. The Buddha there is with Buddhism, and then Hinduism does not have a particular person like the others, and they have some other differences as well in their religion. For example, no real heaven or hell. It's about being better and better throughout life, and reincarnation is mentioned there. Multiple gods there instead of one God in Christianity, for example. So there are some differences there. They're less formal in their worship than are the Christians, and it can be really an individual thing for Hindus. All right, so India and China for here, these last two, and some other nations is where you find a lot of those adherents. All right, so here are some more numbers there, and they're pretty much in line with what I mentioned there. I did not specifically mention Buddhism and Hinduism, but you can see almost 1 billion for the Hinduism, and Buddhism about 500 million. So those 5 right there account for more than half of the world, getting close to about 2/3, and you can see some more information there in terms of where you can find most of the adherents in that second column, the founder and approximate date, and then important writings or scriptures for each of those religions. All right, if you want to take a religious quiz, what you know there, this is our next slide. It's also in the textbook, and the answer key is at the bottom, but you can answer that and see how many of the 15 questions you get right. Just something of interest there. All right, I took it and I got 15, so I actually did. There was a couple I was not familiar with, but most of them I was, so yay for me. All right, on our next slide here, when religion, we're looking at 2 terms that we've seen before, early in the book, but manifest and latent functions. And manifest, are the intended functions of whatever it may be. So in this chapter we are talking about religion. So what is the intended function of a religion? And so it is to bring one into closer submission or conformity there with a higher power, supreme power. And then the rewards or punishments for either compliance or not. That's the main function of religion. Latent functions there could be all types of things that happen that really didn't intend. So maybe just like with education, you find a significant other, or socialization. Those are some positive ones. It could be some negative things as well. And I think we'll have some later slides to help illustrate some of those negative functions that might happen. All right, now Durkheim, with his analysis of religion, he did, for example, believe that there was an integrative function of religion. And so, when he mentions that, he means, bringing people together. Now, some other considerations is religion brings meaning and purpose to lives. And so, if you agree or disagree, that's fine, whichever way you come out. It is interesting if you do a search for famous atheists and YouTube or Google or something like that, and there usually are some people that have made some significant contributions that were atheists that are listed there. So Now, I particularly agree with this first one here, and the meaning and purpose that there's something better to look forward to. But with those atheists there, a lot of them had significant contributions, but yet they're not believing in an afterlife. So that's kind of an interesting question to answer. Is well, why did they see a need to do what they did during their lifetime? All right, another characteristic here and how religion integrates is it offers values and beliefs and all that people hold in common, and so that does synthesize or integrate them and bring them together, especially in times of crisis. Third function here is it strengthens social integration within faiths and denominations, and so we're going to look at already seeing some of the different faiths or religions and denominations. That word literally means people of the name, so we have lots of offshoots. So within Christianity, I'm not sure how many denominations there are, but there's hundreds or thousands. So they would say we have some commonalities, but in other things, we're a little bit different. All right, and then a fourth characteristic there, and then it can be dysfunctional. So there's a negative function to it. Our next slide here allows us another thing to consider, another characteristic to consider about religion and social support. That's the title of the slide there. But this is the old question in religion or philosophy that well, what about bad things that happen to good people? And religion helps you cope with that. Now, still struggle with it, but let there be a storm that wipes out a town, and people die, and lots of people will say, well, why? And really, if there is a being who's all powerful, then why didn't he stop it? If you're God, you're all powerful, and why can't you do something about that? Or maybe even young children who die, or other people who die that we love and we really miss them. People struggle with these type of questions. Religion is supposed to help us deal with these tests of our faith and these really important things that go on in our lives. People do struggle, but if there is a meaning to it, then hopefully religion helps us find a way to deal with these things. All right. Now, in religion, it would help us cope, or maybe say, well, there's a bigger purpose or plan in mind, and so maybe that's one way that people can deal with it. All right, so another theorist here that we've seen, Max Weber, but now he brings up a point here that it depends on, I guess, which sociology book you use. Our book really doesn't have a whole lot, but this is an important slide from one aspect, is that what they're doing is comparing two things. And so from the Protestant ethic, that was the idea under the Protestant Reformation, that really individuals work hard, and then when they make profits, they don't waste it on themselves and materialistic ventures, but rather they reinvest it in the business to make more, because you could help be assured that you were okay with God, in that the fact that you were wealthy. God's smiling on you, so you do have this wealth, and so you maintain that by continually kind of reinvesting. That's the Protestant work ethic, is you work hard and long, and that you eventually achieve success and you maintain it. Now, here we have a religious idea completely, and how it eventually leads to capitalism. And capitalism really has nothing to do with religion. It's all about, just simply the pursuit of profit. So what Weber is really showing us is how a completely religious idea has led to a entirely economic idea. And so a lot of times in some of the other textbooks that you may pick up, they will talk about John Calvin and, for example, Calvinism, and how that also was very influential during this Protestant ethic, and how, again, that whole process came about. So the title of the slide is accurate, Religion and Social Change, but we start with religious ideas, and then eventually, with enough time, they become more of economic ideas. And so, that is really pervasive of the United States in terms of its economic production. It's all about capitalism, not about religion. All right, also within religion, we find social conflict. So this is what really liberation theology is talking about. Now the church, or ecclesia, we'll see that word in a upcoming slide, but it's about, for example, teaching these beliefs that are for the next life, to make one right, so that when they leave this world, they are in a state of happiness and bliss and all that. Liberation theology says, well, while we're here at church, let's talk about the injustice that's here and now on earth. And so it does talk about whether it's based on race or gender or age or any other type variables. You pick them out. Liberation theology says this is what we're going to do to eliminate all these bad things that happen to people. So we want to rectify any form of injustice there, as the end of that slide indicates. All right, so this is, when talking about social conflict, we can't really talk about that without bringing up Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx was really pessimistic about religion in general. His famous statement was, it was the opium of the people, and that's not anything positive. It's saying that religion is something really that deludes their minds. It's not really what they should be focusing on, but it keeps them into the status quo. So, they're never going to be able to get out of that, and so that's, it interfered with Karl Marx's vision of the world, and that's why one of the big reasons he does not or did not like it. All right, so it would reinforce existing patterns of dominance and inequality. Now, Jesse Ventura, who used to be governor of Minnesota, he was, one of the public officials that I remember who basically came out and said the same thing. He was borrowing from Karl Marx and used that religion is the opium of the people remark. So Marx is not alone in his thinking on that. People who subscribe to that point of view would say that, religion really doesn't do anything good at all. Bill Maher is another individual there. He hosts a show on HBO. I think it's Politically Incorrect or something title like that. But he's another one that is very anti-religion. He just says, look at the harm that's going on in the name of religion. It's something we rather shouldn't have. And that's even with his family being kind of very religious, and he just does not subscribe to that point of view. All right, so a sub-theory here under the social conflict is the feminist perspective, so you can see exactly how it fits in, but it's through gender and sex, and especially with religion, how women play a subordinate role to men. So that's one of the points mentioned there on our slide. They take subordinate roles in religious duties there, no matter which religion it tends to be. But they would, this theory here, the feminist perspective, would say, well, we need to right that wrong as well. Now, with that being said, it's interesting here at the bottom of the slide that even if women don't have as many formal public roles in religion, and again, in some of the other books I've had, you could pick out from any number of religious texts, and it would basically show that men, have a leadership role as compared to women do not. So that's, I guess, in keeping with really the theme of this slide. All right, now despite all that, the bottom statement there mentions that in the United States, women are more likely to be affiliated with religion than men. So maybe this is not such a negative thing. I think maybe that could be interpreted in more than one way, and so that's maybe one of those ways. All right, so summing it up here on slide 15 with the three big perspective, and then how we can view religion using each one. All right, so here on the next slide we have about beliefs, and so usually a lot of these beliefs, and where a lot of times science and religion differ, is science is all about empirical, verifiable facts, so available through the senses. And with religion, that's not the case many times, as you have to go beyond the five senses. Now, each religion does have its own particular set of beliefs. So a lot of time we say in the United States that we believe in religious pluralism, where you can join or be a part of the church of your choice. Well, that's certainly true, but I don't think many actually believe that. So if you're going to, say, Church A, and you really believe that Church B and C and on are really just as good and fine as yours, then why would you remain in Church A? So I don't know anybody who really believes that. Now, you do find people who try to convince others to come with them to where they go, because I think that's more representative of what you see, is that a lot of faiths believe that they have the corner or market on faith, and so you need to be with us to actually be okay. All right, now a fundamentalist, that might be descriptive of them, but they, for example, are going to take things very literal. So, think of in the Christian scriptures when it says that the great flood occurred on the earth, they are going to take that as literal, or the fact that it was created in 6 days and on the seventh God rested. That's literal to them. So there are literal parts to the scriptures, and then there are some that are symbolic, but the fundamentalists, with those that seem to be literal, say, yep, that's exactly how we're going to interpret them. Others would say, no, we don't need to take that point of view. I know Dean Smith, a former Carolina basketball coach, he really kind of took not the fundamentalist point of view, but another, and he really saw it as the Bible, speaking of that, as a guidebook rather than a rule book. I guess fundamentalists would say it's a rule book rather than a guidebook. All right, so now we also at the bottom of the slide have an interesting comment there. But spirituality, so one's connection to religion and God, is not as strong as industrialized nations as it is in developing nations. And so, that's an interesting point too. Why is that? So some would say, well, science has actually stepped in and helped, and that's maybe one of the reasons. Science and technology can answer questions for us in industrialized nations that is not in pre-industrialized or developing nations, and so that takes a lot of the supernatural element out of it. All right, what kind of behaviors, what kind of practices do people do in the name of religion? And so that's the point of our next slide. And it does mention there that people over the last few decades seem to be moving away from organized religion and some of the religious rituals there, and they express their spirituality either individually or in some other way. So, church on the internet, or riding your bike in the mountains, or in your garden, or things like that. Many people would say, hey, organized religion, that's what I disagree with, and why do I need all these others to actually feel close to what I do? Now, some of the rituals do involve being together, so like communion, or teaching, singing, praying, or some of the other faiths and whatever they do. That's also part of the ritual idea. How do people have religious experiences? I'm sure you may have heard someone say, well, God has spoken to me. Well, how do you know that? So some people would say there's signs to it. A lot of people would say it's my emotional feeling or something along that line. I heard a voice, I saw this, or what have you there. But that's the religious experience part of it. All right, so here we have a slide that talks about people who have participated in some type of religious ritual or ceremony or service, whatever you want to call it. So the low mark there would be in Denmark, where basically not very many people do that at all, only 4%. The United States is a little over 25%, and then Mexico is tops, along with Poland at over 50%. All right, so here a couple more terms on this next slide. But ecclesia, now that's spelled a little different from normally how I see it, but that is a word that actually means the called out. So people who say they're of a certain faith or belief, they are called out. So where are they called out from? The world, to be a part of whatever religious experience they are. Now that word can be used in a positive or negative sense. So people can use it. In this chapter we're using it for religion, but it's not only in that use. All right, but denominations, I mentioned that earlier, but people of the name, the day is of, nam is name, and nations there, groups of people. All right, but these are again, lots of denominations. I believe there was over 20,000 in the United States alone. So just any type of group you can that's gathered for a religious purpose is what we're talking about. All right, sects seem to be smaller, and sometimes they have a negative reputation there. And we can think of some in the United States relatively recently, the Heaven's Gate cult, and with Marshall Applewhite and. About 40 people lived together in I think it was out west near California, and they believed that their faith was going to lead them to some sort of heavenly reward. It was connected with the Hale-Bopp comet, and all of them poisoned themselves, and they died there under the advice of their spiritual leader. And later they found out through the autopsy that the leader was dying, and all types of things. You can think of David Koresh in Texas, Waco, Texas. It's been, I think, about 20 years, but they would be remembered as sects, and that were really seen as kind of anti to the larger society and odd and all that. Jim Jones in the mid to late 70s is another one there, but all negative examples there. All right, they don't have to be negative. If you read in the Bible there, at one time Christianity, before it really gained momentum in ancient Rome, it was actually called a sect. So some people just didn't understand what they were doing. They were not negative like the other examples, but when some Romans heard about, hey, these people are eating the flesh and drinking the blood of their founder, speaking of Jesus, They just didn't understand it, and so they thought, hey, these are some strange folks going on. All right, now some different ideas, new spirituality ideas, are here on our next slide. So new religious movement, or NRM, and so this is where people they can create a religion, or it's very small and not all widely known. We had an example of this a few years ago, but there was a church here in Clayton. It was called the Church of Body Modification, but there was a young lady there who had some trouble with Johnston County Schools over a nose piercing that she had, and so that was drawn out in the courts, and they initially suspended her, but then reinstated her, and that was maybe a good example here of some of these smaller movements that you might see. All right. And so that was actually challenged. Maybe if she had been a member of a larger, more well-known religion, it probably wouldn't have gone that far. So some of these characteristics probably apply as well. All right, so when we look at some of the different forms of religious organizations, the ecclesia, denominations, and sects can be seen among a continuum. I think there's another chart that really gives us a better idea of this. I know that maybe it's kind of hard to understand at first. But religion can be fluid, meaning you can change around quite a bit. And mentioned earlier as well, the church on the internet. So you don't even have to leave your home if you really don't want to. I had a professor one time at ECU, but that he was really kind of fluid, but not in the electronic sense. But that's what he did. Is around Greenville, he would go around to the different faiths. He would stay there for several months until he basically had a good picture of what was going on, and then he would move on to another one. But he was very fluid, just like this slide is pointing out. All right, do you know anybody who's a member of Wicca or something that might be a quasi-religion? So maybe Scientology, and that's a religion of the stars, but that kind of also maybe one of those that's out there. Or if somebody is a member of another religion, they could help explain this. I know in some of my previous classes, that's exactly what has happened. Is we had somebody who would mention religion, and nobody was really familiar with it in class, and then they would make a presentation about it, and so that helped clear up a lot of questions that people had about it. All right, so here's some of the components of religion and good examples. So with belief, for example, I use the flood, but creation is fine too. That's one that comes up quite a bit in our educational system. Is how did we all get here? Was it through the Big Bang Theory, or was it intelligent design, or the creation account? Rituals, the things that you do. So you can see some examples there. and then experience are listed there as well. All right, just a summary chart of things that have been mentioned here in the chapter. Now this is a better slide that compares all the different types of religious movements that we and bodies that we have been looking at over the last several slides. So going from left to right and top to bottom there, in terms of the size and the wealth, religious services and doctrines, clergy membership and on, you can see how ecclesia, denomination, sect, and new religious movement or cults are actually different or similar or what have you. So that lays it all out there for us. So that's a good one to look over for a few minutes. Alright, in religion in India, I actually have a friend who travels all the time to India as a religious missionary there, and some of these things here can actually verify to be true. Lots of languages in India, but 18 recognized by the government, and just really India is, and it's just like the picture. Most of his photos that he brings back, like we see in our book, but it is really a lot of impoverished people there that they really think Americans are wealthy, and that's to a degree true. But the way that they realize that is if an American comes over there as overweight, they think, well, hey, if you can afford enough food, then you must have extra money. So that's actually not too bad of a way to look at it. But they really, if you're claustrophobic, you're really going to be claustrophobic over there in India, because they do squunch up and all types of activities that they do. All right, we mentioned with India there, Hinduism and Buddhism, so there's lots of beautiful statues with, we might think of them maybe as idols, but represents all these different types of gods and faiths that they have. We would think of it probably as more superstitious than anything. All right, so in India there, just very religious diversity of beliefs. So Hinduism is basically the dominant position, 83%. Islam, and then there's some others there. Sikhism, and that was I had a student in class before that's actually what his chart was about. So he was actually mentioning that there was some confusion between his faith and Islam a lot of times by people who really didn't know the difference. He had a real good presentation about that. I wish I had a copy of it. I would post it on Blackboard if I did. Very, very enlightening information. All right, and then now my friend was a Christian minister there, so that's he is a missionary to teach that to those who are interested there, and without running afoul of the government. One of the things he mentioned there is basically a bicycle is like a car in India, and so for $50, you can buy somebody a bicycle, and so they can ride around and get around that way. All right, so religion in the state of India there. So this is a latent function there, but to help overturn British colonialism there. And you can see some of the byproducts of that is tensions between Hindus and Muslims there. But it is something that has been a driving force in Indian society. All right, the last little few slides here talk about religion in U.S. schools, and that's near the end of the chapter, but there's a couple pages to read there if you want some more information. But what is the role of religion in government? That's really the critical issue here. So some want to maintain a separation between church and state, so the state is not in the business of imparting religious doctrine. Now, our book gives us a few examples, but it says that those who were in the school system cannot, and this was on our religious quiz as well, but cannot lead students in, say, some type of religious observance. Now, the original intent of separation of church and state was not that they couldn't coexist, but it was not to have a national official religion of the United States. And so a lot of European countries, that's exactly what happened, is you were automatically a follower of a given religion because you were a citizen of that location. And so that meant that you had to support something without any say-so in it. And so you could see why people would be upset with that. I mean, I would not want to be told I've got to support, religion X just because I was born in a place where that's the official religion of the nation. So a lot of European nations do have kind of a bad taste from that. All right, now this spills over into, how life was created. So is it by evolution, or is it by intelligent design or creationism? So, which way should schools teach? And so there's been controversy over that as well. Now, I know it was Thomas Jefferson who got a letter, and he received a letter from a group of Baptists, and this is where this phrase separation of church and state was used. And the Baptists were concerned that, hey, are we going to be forced to, believe something we truly don't believe? And Jefferson replied, no, there shall be a separation of church and state. All right, so there's some more interesting reading there in the book that's not brought out here on the slides, but some things that really make you think about which position you're going to take. All right, so here are some more findings there in that article. But the First Amendment protects religious freedom. In 1962, the Supreme Court said that prayer, that in schools was not something that should go or happen, and that did not violate one's First Amendment rights there. And 25 years later, the Supreme Court states that schools were not compelled to teach creationism. So in 1925, this is not on our chart, but we have the Scopes trial, and it was called the monkey trial there. But a biology teacher, John T. Scopes, in Tennessee, was convicted of a crime there because he was teaching the evolution in public school. And so, big trial has resulted from that. All right, so intelligent design is saying, hey, things are so complex that they just could not have come by one-celled animal into what we see today, or one-celled organism with a giant explosion and the billions of years of evolution. That's just not correct. It had to be designed. Watch needs a watchmaker, and it would be, not billions of years, but it would be, there's only been maybe about at most 10,000 years of human history. So you really got two opposite points of view that one has to decide between. All right, so here's our applying sociology component. So we got two sides, supporters and opponents. And the supporters would say we got too much separation in schools between sacred and profane. We need to close the gap. What would be wrong with teaching that? They would probably even make the argument that our nation, the United States, has a Christian heritage, and so when they were forming laws and all types of things of that, what book did they actually use the most? And it would be the Bible. Opponents would take a different view, and they would say, well, why does the majority say the majority does believe what I just said? Why does that have to be enforced on everyone else? Instead of taking a viewpoint of the world from a religious standpoint, why not do it from a scientific standpoint? So that's the sacred and the profane argument all over again. And what about people who don't want to look at it in the way that supporters do? All right, so maybe with public policy there, you can see how important that would be. And it's still under debate. Madeleine Murray O'Hair was one of the individuals who first started the idea of, prayer should be removed from schools. And so you can see lots of people there who simply disagree with religion's place in public life. So in private life, they would not really have a problem with this, but forcing somebody to comply with something they don't agree with is their main issue. All right, so this issue is unlikely to be solved here, as the last mark here on the slide indicates. No signs of this debate slowing down. Okay, well, this has been a short chapter, and hopefully some of these good questions you can think about and decide which way you want to be on it or come down on it. And I certainly appreciate your time. Hope this has been helpful. Keep reading your textbook, and I hope this will pay off on your quizzes and exams. The more you study and think about it, the better you will do. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon.